There's a moment during an episode of the TV series Seinfeld where stand-up comedian Jerry Seinfeld and his best friend George eat lunch at their favourite diner to regularly discuss the minutiae of their day-to-day lives. In this particular episode, Jerry and George are trying to figure out what to write about for an upcoming TV pilot pitch with a major television network. As Jerry makes some amusing observations about the popularity of salsa, George says, "This should be the show." It's a rare moment of clarity for George, who mirrors the real-life inspiration of co-creator Larry David, who comes up with the idea of a show about nothing. It's not that Seinfeld was markedly different from other shows of the same era. The storytelling structure, the three-camera setup, the familiar settings and locations. Seinfeld didn't completely rewrite the concept of the sitcom. The creators were simply bold enough to take a genre with which we were all familiar with and try something new, to explore the dynamic from a different perspective. The idea being that this very familiar formula still had untapped potential waiting to be explored. Director Ishiro Honda, most famous for his Showa-era Godzilla film, said, "Monsters are tragic beings. They are born too tall, too strong, too heavy. They are not evil by choice. That is their tragedy. They do not attack people because they want to, but because of their size and strength. Mankind has no other choice but to defend himself." Kaiju movies haven't changed much since Godzilla first defined the genre back in 1954, setting up the working parameters for nearly every incarnation of this paradigm. The world is faced with an extinction-level event in the form of a massive monster or unknown origins, oftentimes a byproduct of humanity's own hubris or contempt for the natural world in which we exist. The original Godzilla has been considered a filmographic metaphor for the United States, as well as an allegory of nuclear weapons which were first detonated in Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the conclusion of the Second World War. And while the Kaiju movies have gotten larger and more visually dynamic, they have changed precious little in terms of structure and storytelling. As Honda established, the basic premise is from a human perspective. Audiences need relatable characters to associate themselves with and bring them into the story. All Kaiju movies deal with the same basic storytelling issue. The movie has to be about people, boring, non-city destroying people, who sit back to offer breaks between giant monsters being awesome and to try to provide some perspective as these small humans dealing with the ramifications of these gigantic monsters. Kaiju are treated no differently than the asteroid hurtling towards Earth or the wall of lava in danger of leveling Los Angeles. They are another cause of disaster and relegated to a single dimension, and the emotional weight and propensity for driving the story forward is given to the human characters to which we more easily relate. We cannot have a movie without King Kong, where Kong is the protagonist. There must be a human proxy for the audience. But are they necessary? Godzilla, King of the Monsters, a woefully imperfect movie that exposes a lot of the failings of the modern kaiju film. Even though Godzilla and the monsters are in the title, they are, at best, supporting characters, sidelined for a handful of human characters that can offer exposition and thinly written plot points to help string together the moments of monster mayhem that the vast majority of fans were hoping for after purchasing a ticket. Kaiju movies could benefit from a paradigm shift, a move from the traditional structure and forced human perspective into something else. Why not abandon the traditional kaiju movie narrative in favour of a more naturalistic style? What would a kaiju movie look like from a filmmaker like Terrence Malick or Andrei Tarkovsky, where we see these forces of nature working their way through the world, without the cliched scientists and military figures showing up again and again to provide audiences with the same us versus them conflict that has been played out again and again? Kaiju movies are most often treated like disaster films, where our human characters have to deal with the fallout of an uncontrollable event. That angle has led to generations of uninspired kaiju movies where studios resort to trying to raise the stakes by adding more monsters to the mix. To make them bigger, to try and raise the stakes by pitting them against one another. But the basic story is still the same. Writers are shackled by these rules, which force them to come up with human characters that never manage to be anything as interesting as the monstrosities their storyline brings them in contact with. Do all movies require the human perspective? Is there an interesting story that could be crafted about larger-than-life monsters that can be told from an inhuman perspective? Is there untapped potential in a familiar formula that still has untapped potential waiting to be explored? Do kaiju movies need human characters?
And who's on the show? Who are the characters?